17. The Sparks family. After turning the tables on a home intruder back in April 2022, a family from Bakersfield, California realized they were in hot water with the law. The incident happened during the early morning when 50-year-old John Sparks caught someone breaking into his swimming pool business. While responding to Sparks' 911 call at 3 or so in the morning, officers found the suspect, later identified as Scott Sparks, with no actual relation to John, lying motionless in the parking lot with his wrists zip-tied behind his back. According to a police report, John Sparks saw on his security footage that someone had gone inside the fenced property and was removing items from a car. He chased after the suspect on foot and caught up with him outside another local business, where he confronted the thief with a gun. Sparks allegedly fired one warning shot in Scott's direction without hitting him, then forced him to the ground and used the zip ties to tie up his wrists. Prosecutors claimed that John was then joined by 2 of his sons, 23-year-old Brendan Sparks and 20-year-old Trenton Sparks, and that the 3 men proceeded to spend the next 45 minutes punching, kicking, and striking the thief with several objects. When they decided that Scott had had enough, the trio loaded him into a truck and drove him back to the custom pool shop, where they dialed 911 and met responding officers. Scott was then taken to the hospital with significant head and facial injuries. He admitted to the burglary and even apologized for it. When he told authorities about the assault he endured before police were called, the investigation took a strange turn, with the young man now being considered the victim. In the initial aftermath of the incident, the Sparks family was allowed to go back home. A few days later, the Kern County Sheriff's Office criminally charged all 3 men with assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy, and kidnapping. If convicted, they could face up to 7 years each in prison. Although the criminal cases seem to be ongoing, this situation hasn't ended well for anyone so far. It's safe to say that everyone involved, including the burglar-turned-victim and the Sparks trio, completely regretted their actions afterward. Some people think that if you catch someone stealing from your property, it's okay to physically assault them. Others believe that it should only come down to a fight if the victim has to defend themselves. 16. August Williams. In 2019, a woman from North Carolina got the scare of a lifetime when a man approached her one night in North Charlotte and tried to kidnap her. 47-year-old August Williams, the alleged culprit, was trying to stuff the woman into his car when she broke free and ran into a nearby karate dojo. The head instructor at the facility, Randall Ephraim, later told CNN that he was cleaning up after a class when the woman suddenly rushed inside and said someone was trying to hurt her. A large man soon came inside the dojo. Ephraim assumed he was there to talk about classes and asked how he could help. The man allegedly said he was there for the girl, who continued to insist that she didn't know who the man was and that he was trying to abduct her. Speaking with CNN, Ephraim said he asked Williams to get out, but the accused kidnapper said he wasn't going anywhere. Williams then allegedly tried to push his way deeper into the dojo, at which point Ephraim did what he felt was necessary to defend himself and forced the suspect out of the building. The karate instructor said that the suspect tried to attack him again once they were outside, and that he handled the situation accordingly. Local news station WSOC also noted that the suspect tried to assault police officers before he was taken into custody. The encounter ended with Williams getting loaded into an ambulance and taken to the hospital. We're not sure why he thought he could take on a karate teacher with no training himself, but criminals usually aren't the sharpest tools in the shed. 15. Dylan Molina. Euless, Texas police detective Alex Cervantes was off duty when a drunk driver ran a red light in front of him and hit his car back in November 2021. The officer's wife and 2 children were also in the sedan when it was struck at an intersection in Lake Worth. Cervantes passed away from his injuries, while the rest of his family was simply injured. 26-year-old Dylan Molina tried to leave the scene on foot after crashing his Jeep into the family's car. But a man who witnessed the accident was not about to sit idly by and let that happen. In a harrowing pursuit that was captured on film, the bystander chased after Molina and ordered him to stop. Footage that was released in 2023 showed the Good Samaritan pursuing the man while yelling things like, "You stay right there," and "You see what you did? You killed somebody." His words were riddled with profanities that we probably shouldn't repeat, but we're sure you can imagine what he might have said. In the video, Molina could be seen tripping and falling onto the ground, bringing the short chase to an end. The man who pursued him physically restrained the suspect until police arrived. According to investigators, Molina drank about 8 double vodka Red Bulls, the equivalent of 16 alcoholic drinks, in less than 3 hours at a nearby taco restaurant called Fuzzy's. He started drinking at 10:40 in the morning and left the restaurant around 1:12 in the afternoon. His blood alcohol content was over twice the legal limit for driving when he hit the Cervantes family. At the start of 2023, Molina pleaded guilty to charges of intoxication manslaughter and 3 counts of intoxication assault. He was handed a 15-year prison sentence for the manslaughter charge and 10 years for each intoxication assault charge, which will be served concurrently. In other words, he'll only serve 15 years total. Around the same time, authorities took the restaurant's bartender, Kayla Richardson, into custody on a misdemeanor charge of over-serving alcohol. Surveillance footage from the day Molina drank at Fuzzy's seems to show him coming out from an employee-only area and walking behind the bar. Richardson was seen motioning for him to go back around the bar and sit down. As Molina stumbled over a stool, the bartender helped him back up to his feet. He stumbled around a bit more before finally leaving the restaurant. The crash happened within moments of him walking out the door. After finding Molina's drink unattended, Richardson looked out at the parking lot, then removed the drink from the bar. Authorities are now accusing her of missing obvious signs that Molina was incredibly drunk and failing to take action when she had every chance to stop something deadly from happening. If convicted, she could face up to a year behind bars as well as a $4,000 fine. 14. Store owner put shoplifters on blast. In early 2023, the owners and workers at the boutique store Sugar Hawaii had to deal with as many as 3 shoplifting cases a day at the store's 4 locations on the island of Oahu. The business was hit especially hard during the holiday season, and while many thieves think stores can afford the loss of merchandise, this wasn't the case for Sugar Hawaii. As a small business with only a handful of merchants, the company was and is deeply affected by thefts, including those of small items, which can quickly add up to big losses. In an attempt to curb the ongoing issue and to bring some shoplifters to justice, the business started posting surveillance photos of suspects on social media and asking the public for help identifying the suspects in the photos. Some people disapproved of the assertive strategy, while others thought it was a great way to show that shoplifting isn't tolerated and that anyone who steals can expect to have their picture show up on the store's page. Eve Weiler, who was visiting Hawaii from California when the story first broke, told ABC 17 News that she thinks it's a great way to hold burglars accountable. She mentioned how thieves often think they've got away with their crime and will never have to answer for it once they walk out the doors. The new method of catching suspects has actually been wildly successful, according to company president James Gishen, who estimated that about 95% of alleged shoplifters were caught after being featured online. He said that in many of the cases, people return merchandise after seeing their photo pop up online. And there's no such thing as a typical thief, according to Gleason, who told ABC that they come from all backgrounds and ages, and include students, the elderly, and even the wealthy. Before posting any pictures, the staff usually go through a thorough process of consulting a security team and verifying that each person is a confirmed suspect, and that they have reason to believe the person took something without paying for it. 13. Nicholas Norton. A 90-year-old retired boxer was simply relaxing in the living room of his Hull, England home one day back in 2022 when a man suddenly came to his front door faking a leg injury. The senior citizen let the seemingly hurt person inside and left for a moment to get a rag for the man to clean his wound with. Nicholas Norton took this opportunity to grab the old man's wallet and run away. After realizing that he'd been set up, the former middleweight champion and military veteran got into his car and drove around nearby to look for the thief, who he eventually spotted at a nearby store. Determined to get his wallet back, he told a security guard what was happening and searched the store for Norton, who was about to pay for a bottle of whiskey. The old man said that he grabbed Norton by the scruff of the neck and smacked him on the chin, then asked where his wallet was. Norton allegedly claimed he didn't have it, but was quick to hand the wallet over when the victim threatened him. But it didn't just end there. When the victim realized his bank cards weren't in the wallet, he demanded to know where they were. The suspect said he hid them outside, so the older man struck him in the head again, at which point Norton pulled the cards out of his pockets and gave them back. By the time the retiree got his wallet back completely, the culprit had only managed to buy a candy bar with the stolen debit card. In a statement, the victim said that it's not right how thieves often target elderly victims. And while he suffered from high blood pressure, leg and hand issues, he still really wanted his wallet back. While in police custody, Norton admitted to stealing the wallet and buying items with the victim's card. He also mentioned that he would probably be going back to prison, indicating that this wasn't his first close call with the law. He was apparently looking at 5 years behind bars for what he did. The elderly man told the press that in addition to being a former boxing champion, he makes it a point to stay in shape despite his old age. He said his daughter told him he was too old to be recklessly chasing after burglars, but he insisted he acted out of instinct. The pensioner also said that he hoped the situation taught the thief a lesson and that Norton should think twice before trying to rob another senior citizen. By then, Norton already had 80 previous convictions under his belt, including 44 for theft, so it's unlikely he learned anything at all. But at least he was taken off the streets for 3.5 years worth of prison. 12. Chelsea Leon. Many people see drug dealing as a victimless crime, since the majority of street-level transactions are consensual and non-violent. In other words, the customer chooses when to buy and use the drugs. Nobody forces them to do it. This mentality also goes by the philosophy that the drug user will likely find the product one way or another, and that this somehow makes the dealer less culpable if the drugs make a person sick or even kill them. But law enforcement doesn't see it that way. While selling drugs can come with harsh punishments, authorities in some parts of the United States have started looking for ways to bring the hammer down even harder in recent years, as the country's been plagued by an ongoing opioid epidemic. In early 2016, 3 women in Cattaraugus County, New York, were hit with homicide charges for selling fentanyl-laced heroin that caused multiple deadly overdoses. One of those women was Chelsea Leons, who was accused of giving the drug to a married man she was having an affair with. Leons introduced 42-year-old Matthew Harper to heroin back in 2014. The man entered rehab later that year after his wife discovered the scandalous affair. After going through treatment, he went back to school and continued focusing on fixing his marriage. He was only a few months away from getting his degree when he fatally overdosed at Leon's home in February 2016. It was believed to be his first time using after being sober for 6 months. Leon was just one of the 3 women from Oleon who was arrested for the deadly overdoses that happened over a month-long period. It was the first time prosecutors in the area pursued homicide charges against drug dealers. And while the charges against the other 2 women were eventually dropped, the case against Leon stuck. Harper and Leon used from the same batch of heroin the night of Harper's death. Prosecutors argued that the woman was responsible for the tragedy since she sold Harper his portion of the drug. Speaking with the Olean Times-Herald, District Attorney Laurie Riemann described Leon as an experienced user who should have known Harper wouldn't have a high tolerance for the drug after being clean for so long. Leon's defense attorney, Matthew Albert, argued that his client and Harper made consensual bad choices together, and that the only difference between the two is that one of them died. Albert also said that Harper contacted Leon and asked her to help him get the heroin, which she agreed to, but that she was not a career drug dealer. In April 2017, Leon pleaded guilty to criminally negligent homicide, making her the first seller in Cattaraugus County to be convicted for a user's fatal overdose. She was also convicted of criminal sale of a controlled substance and a possession charge, and was handed 1 to 3 years in prison, followed by an additional year of probation. 11. Morel B Tyler. During one morning in October 2022, a masked intruder went inside an apartment in Kokomo, Indiana, and tried to hold 3 men at gunpoint during an armed robbery. Instead of listening to the gunman's orders, the trio immediately jumped into action, knocking the gun out of the suspect's hand and tackling him to the ground. A struggle ensued, and the suspect fired a shot as he tried pulling the weapon on the victims. Luckily, nobody was hit by the stray bullet. Using his own gun, one of the victims disarmed and subdued the would-be robber, while the police were called to the scene. Responding officers found the suspect pinned to the floor and covered in facial injuries. He was identified as 18-year-old Morel B Tyler and was taken for medical treatment before being booked into custody on suspicion of felony burglary. In his mugshot, his face seemed to be covered in cuts and he had a swollen black eye. The victims were also injured but didn't need medical attention. They were never charged in the case either. If convicted of the burglary charge, Tyler could face a prison sentence of 3 to 7 years. 10. Brave nun stops botched robbery. As the director of the Response to Love Center in Buffalo, New York, Sister Mary Janice Radkiewicz gives meals and guidance to some of the city's neediest citizens. In 2023, she just finished her morning prayers one Saturday when she heard a strange sound from outside and saw a ladder against the building. Sister Janice went outside to investigate. As soon as she opened the door, she saw 2 men, one on the ground and another on top of the building's roof, where he and his accomplice were supposedly planning to steal gutters and pipes for scrap metal. One of the suspects fled the scene right then and there. The brave nun later told the Buffalo News that she said, "Get out of here, this is God's mission. What are you doing to his property?" She knocked the ladder down, leaving the man on the roof no other choice but to jump down. As soon as he landed, he ran in the opposite direction of his accomplice, while Sister Janice prayed that neither of them were hurt. Even if the thieves had gotten their hands on the building's fixtures, they wouldn't have gotten much money for the pieces. After having the copper gutters and downspout stolen a few years earlier, the center had already replaced them with aluminium. The facility took to social media with the story, along with photos of the suspects in hopes that members of the public would come forward and identify them. Unfortunately, the would-be thieves remain at large to this day. There's a good chance they had to keep a low profile in order to not get caught, since the story went viral and made national news headlines. Sister Janice was even invited to make an appearance on the Tucker Carlson Tonight before his departure from Fox News Entertainment. During the show, she said that the incident inspired her to look back on the importance of serving God's mission and helping others. She explained that the center is in one of Buffalo's poorest neighborhoods and that it's often subject to theft and violence. But Sister Janice doesn't let this stop her from continuing to serve the community. She described the center as a safe and special place where people can come together for a shared meal, and her response to the men who tried messing with her vision showed just how determined she was to protect it. 9. Bruce Mway. While on the way to a job interview in North Olmsted, Ohio during early 2021, 57-year-old Bruce Mway allegedly decided that robbing a bank was easier than making an honest living. According to police, he went into a key bank inside a shopping center and demanded money from the teller while saying he had a gun. The cashier handed over the cash quickly, and the thief left without hurting anyone. He was long gone by the time police officers arrived. Mway's parole officer from an unrelated case recognized him in a surveillance photo that police posted on social media. In the picture, the suspect was wearing his COVID mask improperly, exposing more of his face than he should have and making him recognizable to his PO. After finding out that law enforcement was actively looking for him, Mway turned himself in by going inside a Dollar General store and asking employees to call the police. He was subsequently booked into the Cuyahoga County Jail on suspicion of robbery. According to Ohio prison records, he's now serving an 11.5 to 30-year sentence for multiple charges, including robbery and aggravated robbery. His earliest possible parole date is 2026, and it's probably safe to assume that Mway wishes he had gone to the job interview. 8. Gary Bailey. In 2022, a man was peacefully sleeping with his girlfriend on their apartment's living room sofa in Dublin, Ireland, when he heard a strange noise coming from inside his bedroom. He got up and discovered that there was an intruder. His thoughts immediately went to protecting his girlfriend. Acting on instinct, the man fought hard to restrain the suspect, later identified as 45-year-old Gary Bailey. He wrapped his legs around the intruder, but Bailey grabbed at the man's crotch in response, causing him to scream out in pain. The girlfriend was awake by this point and had realized there was an unwelcome presence in the home. Acting on her boyfriend's instructions, she grabbed a knife from the kitchen and called law enforcement. In the meantime, Bailey managed to break free. He made it halfway out the window before the victim started beating his legs with a golf club. As he continued scrambling to get out, Bailey got caught up in the blinds, causing him to dangle briefly by his foot before falling to the ground down below. He also broke a TV during the tense struggle. Authorities were unable to question Bailey for 6 hours after his arrest due to his mental state. He later said that he was out of his mind high on pills, and that when he noticed an apartment window was open, he saw an opportunity to sneak in and take what he could get his hands on. The court heard about how it wasn't a thoroughly planned out robbery, but instead a spur-of-the-moment crime. Bailey also said that he knocked on the victim's window a few times and only went inside after he got no response and concluded that nobody was home. Once the resident attacked him, he said that his only goal was to get out as soon as possible. His lawyer told the court that his client had a long history of drug addiction, that he'd tried to get sober several times, and that he felt remorseful for his actions. Bailey ultimately decided to add to his growing list of burglary convictions by pleading guilty. The judge acknowledged the seriousness of the crime, but conceded that the defendant was focused on escaping once he knew someone was actually home, and that he didn't commit any gratuitous violence. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison for the crime. 7. MMA fighter versus armed mugger. A thief chose the wrong person to try stealing from in early 2019 when he targeted Brazilian UFC star Poliana Viana. The 26-year-old fighter was waiting for an Uber in Rio de Janeiro when the thief brandished a fake gun and demanded she give him her phone. Putting her MMA skills to use, Viana punched and kicked at the man, then put him in a rear-naked choke until police arrived. Viana later told MMA Junkie that the would-be bandit sat down next to her and asked for the time. She told him, but he didn't go away, so she knew something fishy was happening. At that point, the man tried to rob her while warning her he was armed. The so-called gun was very obviously too soft to be real, so Viana knocked him down with 2 quick punches and a kick. He fell over, giving the athlete an opportunity to restrain him. While maintaining the chokehold, Viana guided the wannabe thief back to where they were sitting. She said she remained calm throughout the ordeal, and after throwing the first 2 hits, the suspect realized it would be easier to not fight back. He even begged Viana to let him go, claiming he'd just asked for the time, and asked her to call the police because being at her mercy was scarier than being arrested. Bypassers called the cops while Viana held the man, who was taken to the hospital for medical treatment before going to the police station. According to the fighter, the suspect had recently been arrested for an unrelated crime. Sadly, having to defend herself against criminals was nothing new for Viana, who had been targeted in a previous robbery. During that incident, a thief broke Viana's umbrella and tried stealing her phone, but instead, he got punched in the face. She told MMA Junkie that she was scared during that incident, possibly because the man had someone else with him, but she maintained her tough exterior. 6. Noah Daat. When a man they didn't recognize knocked on the door of a Florida couple's Northport home and asked to speak with someone named Josh, who apparently owed him money, the homeowners immediately got suspicious. The husband told the stranger he had the wrong house, but the man proceeded to break down the door with a baseball bat. Determined to protect their 3 children, who were in the home at the time, the husband fought back against the intruder by putting him in a bear hug. His wife rushed over and grabbed the baseball bat, which she then proceeded to beat the suspect with. The man fled the scene, but was later identified as 33-year-old Noah Daat. He was eventually captured by Charlotte County Sheriff's deputies. They picked him up at a hospital, where suspicious employees called the cops thanks to the nature of his injuries. He was trying to get treatment for a black eye and other injuries while using a fake name. Daat was charged with armed burglary, battery, and criminal mischief. He was convicted of burglary and simple battery and was released from prison in 2018 after serving 2 years for the crime. 5. Xavier Thomas Jones. In a terrifying encounter that was captured on surveillance footage, 24-year-old Nishali Alma was attacked after letting a man into the gym at her apartment complex in Tampa, Florida. The woman was working out alone when she saw the man come up to the locked door one day in 2023. Having seen the man there before, Alma buzzed him in, thinking he was just another resident wanting to exercise and had simply forgotten his key. Everything seemed normal for the first few minutes as she continued with her workout. But things took a disturbing turn when the man, 25-year-old Xavier Thomas Jones, approached Alma and tried to grab her waist. She immediately fought back, and for over a minute, the suspect continued to attack as they fell on the ground wrestling. Alma briefly gained the upper hand by grabbing the man's beard and twisting it. She later told ABC 11 that she could tell based on the suspect's expression that it was extremely painful. But Thomas Jones managed to pin her as she continued fighting back and tried to dial 911. Every time she tried to call the police, the suspect grabbed her arm, so she put the phone down and fought as hard as she could manage. Alma's a bodybuilder, and she knew she was considerably stronger than Thomas Jones expected. She hoped he would eventually just get tired and give up. Luckily, it worked. By the end of the video, the attacker was exhausted, enabling Alma to break free and escape the gym. Hillsborough County Sheriff's deputies found Thomas Jones the next day and arrested him on suspicion of battery, false imprisonment, and kidnapping. On the surface, some people might see the situation as a funny example of a guy being beaten up by a girl. But on a more serious note, Alma hoped that the viral video, along with her ability to fight off her attacker, served as a source of empowerment for women and a reminder to never give up and to always keep fighting. 4. Allan Slattery. Over 2 weeks in early 2021, 67-year-old Allan Slattery tried to rob 3 banks in Sussex, England by handing tellers a handwritten note demanding cash. But one robbery of a nationwide building society branch failed when the worker couldn't read Slattery's handwriting. Unsure of what else to do, he left the bank empty-handed. Slattery was gone by the time employees figured out that the note actually said, "Your screen won't stop what I've got. Just hand over the 10s and 20s, think about the other customers." Police were still investigating the robbery when he went into another bank about a week later, this time with a more clearly written note, and left with a couple $1,000s. Another week after that, Slattery robbed another bank, and while the cashier could read the note, they refused to hand over money. Once again, he left empty-handed. Authorities caught up with Slattery at his house before any more botched heists could happen and took him into custody on 1 count of robbery and 2 counts of attempted robbery. He pleaded guilty to everything and was sentenced to 4 years in prison followed by 2 years of probation. 3. Anthony Miranda. An MMA fighter was sitting in his car on Chicago's southwest side one day back in 2011 when he was approached by a young man who asked for a lighter. The fighter said he didn't have one, and the stranger, 24-year-old Anthony Miranda, allegedly pulled out a gun, demanded valuables, and ordered the victim out of his car. The pro fighter, who often competed in UFC matches, was unarmed at the time, but as you can probably imagine, he didn't need a weapon to help defend himself. He fought back against the suspect, and as they fell to the ground in a struggle, the victim grabbed the attacker's gun. They continued to fight, and at some point Miranda accidentally discharged the weapon, shooting himself in the ankle. The victim overpowered the suspect and held him down until the police arrived. It wasn't Miranda's first brush with the law, according to the Chicago Tribune. At the time of the botched robbery, he was on parole after being released from prison a year before. He also had several robbery convictions on his record, including multiple residential burglary cases. But it was probably the first time he was completely covered in bruises and scratches in his mugshot. Miranda was charged with armed robbery and aggravated discharge of a firearm and held at the Cook County Jail on $350,000 bond. Since then, he stayed largely out of the news, leaving the outcome of this case unclear. 2. Gregory Mallum. In 2009, when 24-year-old Gregory Mallum broke into his 72-year-old neighbor Frank Corty's house in Oxford, England, he probably didn't expect much of a struggle, especially since he was armed with a knife. But the intruder underestimated the senior citizen's ability to defend himself, and he probably didn't know that Corty was once a boxer. Frank was at home with his wife Margaret at the time. As soon as he saw Mallum lunging at him with a weapon, he moved out of the way. The suspect lost his balance, giving Corty an opportunity to grab him by the wrists and pin him up against the wall. The retiree then delivered 2 powerful right hooks to Mallum's face, leaving the knife-wielding thug with severe facial injuries, including a busted lip and a black eye. Corty restrained Mallum until police got to the scene and took him into custody. He later said that while he didn't knock the young man out, he was clearly stunned by the blows and unable to move. It was revealed in court that the neighbors were in a fight over noise. The rivalry started when police showed up at Mallum's home to address a noise complaint after a summer house party. Mallum assumed that Corty made the complaint and broke into his house the next morning. In court, Mallum's defense lawyer argued that his client looked like he'd been in a car accident, while Corty walked away with minor injuries. The lawyer described the aftermath of the incident as resembling a murder scene. Mallum claimed he had no memory of committing the crime, while the prosecutor accused him of being intoxicated during the break-in. Corty offered no apologies, stating that if he had to, he would do it again in a heartbeat. He also said he was scared when he saw Mallum holding a knife, which he described like a 6-bladed knuckle duster. He said that most people would have reacted the same way he did. In his words, if you can't defend what's yours, where are we at? The pensioner also explained that he was woken up by noise in the middle of the night for months. He described frequently hearing doors slamming, shouting, music, and the other sounds that accompany wild parties coming from the direction of Mallum's home. About an hour and a half before the break-in, Corty had awoken to someone banging on his front door. A jury found Mallum guilty of aggravated burglary. He was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison, while the older man received no charges. 1. Joshua David Henderson. In a bank heist that could be best described as completely bizarre, a man named Joshua David Henderson went into a key bank branch in Portland, Oregon in March 2023, wearing a surgical mask, a Chicago Bulls cap, and what one witness described as lunch lady gloves. According to court documents obtained by local news station Coin, he entered an office holding a cardboard sign that read, "I want top and bottom drawers. Hundreds, 50s, 20s, 10s. I have a gun." The thief told the employee that he didn't want to hurt someone. Unaware that the staff member had secretly slipped a tracking device into the wad of nearly $2,800 in cash she handed over, Henderson simply threw the money in a bag. Before leaving the scene, he said, "Call yourself a lawyer. You've been through a traumatic event." But it was actually the robber who found himself in a regrettable position as police got to work taking down witness reports. Meanwhile, the bank's security system started tracking the GPS device that made its way into the thief's bag. An officer caught up with Henderson only 10 blocks away. As the cop approached, the suspect threw the bag of money into someone's lawn as the GPS unit chirped loudly, making its presence known. Inside the bag, the officer found the stolen cash and the robber's disguise. Henderson was taken into custody on suspicion of robbery. And while he's innocent until proven guilty just like any other criminal defendant in America, he has quite a bit of explaining to do for the items found in his possession and the tracking device that led to his whereabouts. 15. Quento Moultrie and Taylor Manjarrez. A home break-in along Florida's Palm Coast ended in deadly gunfire in early 2022 when a pair of alleged thieves attempted to burglarize a Flagler County home. According to authorities, 23-year-old Quento Moultrie, his girlfriend, 19-year-old Taylor Manjarrez, and a man named Xavier Roberts went to the residence of Danielle Marashi for what they believed was supposed to be a drug deal. Something went wrong during the transaction and it led to a shootout between the parties. Marashi shot and killed Xavier Roberts, but was not charged in connection with the incident. And although they didn't fire the fatal shot, Quento Moultrie and Taylor Manjarrez were charged with armed burglary, second-degree murder, and other crimes. Under Florida law, if someone dies during the commission of a felony, the individuals who committed the crime that was going on at the time can be held criminally liable for the victim's death. Taylor Manjarrez took a plea deal and admitted to second-degree murder and principal to armed robbery in exchange for a 10 to 20-year prison sentence. She's scheduled to be sentenced in September 2023 and is being held on $400,000 bail in the meantime. Her decision to turn state's witness could have serious implications for Quento Moultrie, who's chosen to leave his fate in the hands of a jury. He's being held on a $400,000 bail while he awaits trial. If convicted of the murder charge, he could face life in prison. And although Danielle Marashi was not charged in connection with Robert's death, he faces a multitude of other charges in unrelated cases. It's unclear whether Manjarrez's decision to testify as a witness in exchange for a plea deal will affect Marashi's usefulness to the state in a way that will affect prosecutors' decision over whether or not to grant leniency in his other cases. 14. Shelby Taylor Wise. While working at a bank in Houston, Texas back in 2018, 25-year-old Shelby Taylor Wise watched as a customer withdrew $75,000 in cash for her business. Surveillance footage showed Wise eyeing the woman while sending a text message on her phone. Later that day, the customer was violently attacked by two men who were after her bag full of money. Prosecutors would later accuse Wise of sending a go signal to the other two suspects, who were identified by law enforcement as her boyfriend, Travon Johnson, and another man named Davis Dowell Mitchell. Video released by police showed two men dragging the victim along the ground and punching and kicking her as she clung desperately to her purse. The pair eventually managed to steal the money from the woman after running her over with a car. She survived but was hospitalized with critical injuries and out $75,000. Her husband was also hurt in the struggle and was treated at the scene for his injuries. Mitchell was arrested at the scene while Johnson turned himself in later on. Police eventually arrested 4 suspects including Wise. Authorities said that Wise had verified connections with at least one of the other suspects at the time they announced her arrest. She was booked into the Harez County Jail on a second-degree felony robbery charge with bond set at $75,000. As new details of the incident were released, it was revealed that Wise allegedly rented the vehicle that was used as a getaway car in the robbery. She reportedly claimed that she rented the car for the purpose of driving to her father's funeral in Arizona, but that it was stolen. Court records claim that Johnson met with Mitchell prior to the robbery and told him it was a guaranteed $60,000 payout, indicating that Wise was in fact involved with the theft. According to records, Wise pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. 13. Rachel Harez and Ronjai Cook. What was meant to be a romantic rendezvous for one Texas man turned deadly when he unexpectedly met with foul play during the early morning hours in early 2023. Using a dating app, the 23-year-old connected with a woman later identified as 22-year-old Rachel Harez. The two made plans to meet at Rachel's apartment complex in Houston at 1:00 a.m. one February morning. When the man arrived, the young woman escorted him from the parking lot into her apartment. Once inside, he encountered Rachel's boyfriend, 23-year-old Ronjai Cook, who allegedly demanded his money and belongings at gunpoint. According to investigators, the victim ran to his vehicle, grabbed a rifle, and fatally shot Cook. In the meantime, Rachel dialed 911 and told operators that an armed man was at her home. Cook was found dead in the parking lot of the apartment complex. Police also recovered a fake gun wrapped in duct tape at the scene, which they believe Cook used in the attempted robbery. Rachel Juarez was charged with aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. She remains behind bars at the Harris County Jail on $50,000 bond while awaiting the next steps in her case. When the story first broke, the media reported that the robbery victim had been taken in for questioning and that once the investigation was over, the case would go to a grand jury to decide whether or not to press homicide charges against the man. There have been no updates since, indicating that the investigation is still ongoing or that the jury decided not to move forward with the charges. In some states, being able to run away from a thief means that you cannot legally shoot them in self-defense. Other states have more generous laws when it comes to a person's right to pull the trigger against someone who victimizes them in a violent crime. 12. Gavin Williams and Lars Albertson. Hospital staff members in St. George, Utah were more than a little suspicious in January 2023 when a man showed up at an emergency room with 6 gunshot wounds to his arm and 11 bullet holes on the outside of his vehicle near the driver's seat. Meanwhile, police responded to a report of shots fired on a nearby highway where they found multiple shell casings and jars filled with marijuana. During a months-long investigation that followed, law enforcement identified 8 suspects who were allegedly involved in the botched robbery. Detectives ultimately identified 19-year-olds Gavin David Williams and Lars Randall Albertson as the accused shooters. Authorities finally arrested the pair in May 2023, 4 months after the incident occurred. According to records, the other suspects pointed toward Gavin Williams as the mastermind of a plot to rob the victim's marijuana. He allegedly provided the guns that were used in the shooting, while Albertson provided a photo of the money to the victim as supposed proof that the suspects were good for the purchase, even though they never planned on paying for the weed in the first place. According to the accomplices who chose to speak to law enforcement, Williams and Albertson fired shots at the victim while he was in his vehicle, attempting to flee the scene. The suspects also accused Williams of threatening to kill his co-conspirators if they told anyone about the botched robbery, and of deceiving his girlfriend regarding his whereabouts during the incident after finding out that she spoke with detectives. Williams and Albertson each face 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of felony aggravated robbery, felony criminal mischief resulting in the loss of more than $5,000, felony criminal conspiracy, and a felony gun-related charge. 11. Norman Newsom and Alton Brown. As they entered their home in Oswego County, New York late one night in late 2021, 41-year-old Russell Bardin, 41-year-old Aaron Smith, and Smith's girlfriend were ambushed by 2 men in bandanas who forced them into the house. Just moments later, Smith collapsed from a single gunshot. His girlfriend heard 1 or 2 more gunshots as she ran toward the garage in an attempt to flee the scene. She eventually re-entered the home and found both Smith and Bardin suffering from gunshot wounds. Bardin survived, but Smith died from his injuries. Investigators ultimately traced the deadly robbery to 3 suspects. Bardin's ex-girlfriend, Brittany Yerdon, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and second-degree attempted murder in exchange for a prison sentence of 23 years to life. The other 2 suspects, Alton D. Brown and Norman A. Newsom, rejected plea offers, which would have come with sentences of 25 years to life, and instead chose to go to trial. They were both convicted of all charges they faced, which included 3 counts each of second-degree murder, 2 counts of second-degree attempted murder, 3 counts of first-degree assault, and 1 count each of first-degree burglary, first-degree attempted robbery, second-degree attempted robbery, and a weapon-related charge. At Brown's sentencing, Chief District Attorney Mark Moody described the defendant as incapable of living within the bounds of the law. He said he couldn't think of anyone more deserving of the maximum sentence and implored the judge to more or less throw the book at Brown. Brown's defense attorney, Sean Chase, claimed that his client had no idea a shooting was going to occur. He acknowledged that Brown was a career drug dealer, but insisted that he felt deeply remorseful over the deadly outcome of the situation. Chase further described Brown as having a limited ability to support his family and essentially committing the crime out of desperation. He also mentioned Brown's lack of prior violent convictions as a potential mitigating factor to be considered in the defendant's sentence. The prosecution described Newsom's role in the shooting as horrendous, and while Moody acknowledged that the defendant lacked a lengthy criminal history, he pointed out that Newsom did have a prior first-degree robbery conviction and urged the judge to sentence the defendant appropriately for being an active participant in the more recent incident. During the hearing, Newsom spoke briefly, apologizing for what happened, but denying accountability for pulling the trigger. But the defense pleas failed to garner much leniency. Alton Brown was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison, while Newsom received a sentence of 40 years to life. If either of the men ever see freedom again, they'll spend the remainder of their lives on supervised release. Neither defendant admitted to being the shooter. In fact, both denied it, which at the very least shows a lack of responsibility and remorse on at least one of their behalves. While this may sound like your run-of-the-mill robbery gone wrong, cases like this are rare in the part of New York State where the botched home invasion occurred. It was the first homicide case to go to trial in Oswego County since 2015. To this day, nobody knows for sure who pulled the trigger. 10. Xavier Brooks. A young man from Detroit named Edmund Lamont Butler was found unresponsive in his car one afternoon in July 2022 with a single gunshot wound to the back of the head. By the time officers discovered the young man while responding to a call about shots fired, it was unfortunately too late to save him. He'd been gunned down in broad daylight. Nearly 2 months passed without any arrests as law enforcement investigated the perplexing case. Finally, in September 2022, authorities announced that they'd finally charged someone in connection with the case: the victim's lifelong best friend, Xavier Brooks. According to investigators, Brooks confessed to fatally shooting Butler during a robbery gone wrong. He allegedly admitted that he planned to meet with the victim to buy $200 worth of marijuana, but that it was a setup. Brooks allegedly got into the backseat of the car behind Butler, who was sitting in the driver's seat, and shot him before fleeing the scene. Although the situation clearly appears to be a bungled robbery, the fact that Butler and Brooks were best friends calls into question the alleged shooter's motive, which remains unclear. Brooks faces charges of felony murder, carrying a concealed weapon, and 2 felony gun counts. He's being charged as an adult and will face court proceedings and potential consequences accordingly. In a statement, prosecutor Kim Worthy said that the decision to hold the defendant accountable as an adult came after carefully weighing his alleged degree of decisiveness and weighing of his options. In other words, the prosecution believes that Brooks thought long and hard enough about his actions ahead of time to understand the gravity of the crime and to demonstrate a significant level of intent. And in Worthy's words, the situation is truly tragic, any way you look at it. 9. Bonnie Betsy Gooch. A bank teller in Pleasant Hill, Missouri, roughly 35 miles southeast of Kansas City, came face-to-face with an unlikely suspect in April 2023 when an elderly woman approached with a note demanding money. The handwritten message was bizarrely apologetic in nature, containing an instruction for 13,000 small bills, followed by, "Thanks, I didn't mean to scare you." Based on surveillance footage and witness statements, law enforcement described the suspect as wearing a surgical mask, sunglasses, and plastic gloves. She approached the counter in broad daylight around 3:20 p.m. and could be seen banging on the counter and urging the teller to hurry in a security video of the attempted heist. The suspect, identified by authorities as 78-year-old Bonnie Gooch, didn't get very far before she was nabbed by police. She was pulled over just 2 miles away from the bank. According to police, the floor of her vehicle was covered in cash. Miss Gooch also allegedly reeked of booze, but she wasn't charged with any alcohol-related crimes. Speaking with the Kansas City Star, Pleasant Hill Police Chief Tommy Wright said that the arresting officers were confused when a little old lady stepped out of the suspected getaway vehicle. In fact, he said they weren't even sure if they had the right person at first. In 3 decades of working in law enforcement, Wright had never encountered a robbery suspect who was pushing 80 years old. But robbing banks is apparently nothing new for Gooch, who has 2 prior convictions on her record for the crime. One from a 1977 heist in California and another from a 2020 robbery outside Kansas City, which she was on probation for until November 2021. According to the most recent available updates, the case is ongoing. 8. Fatal Florida drug robbery. On April 29, 2023, 20-year-old Brent Alley and a friend traveled across Florida in a rented Porsche, driving from Jacksonville to Pinellas County to buy $40,000 worth of marijuana from 26-year-old Joshua Ashley. But something went terribly wrong. Deputies responded to a report of shots fired and found Ali unresponsive and suffering from a single gunshot wound to the abdomen. He was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital, and a lengthy and complex investigation followed. The findings revealed that Joshua Ashley was the victim's marijuana supplier, but this time was different. Instead of business as usual, Ashley allegedly conspired with 3 other suspects to rob Ali instead of providing him with the product he was coming for. According to detectives, Ashley and one of his accomplices, 32-year-old Terrell Jackson, stopped at Ashley's house to retrieve a handgun before the planned robbery. From there, they proceeded to 32-year-old Scott Quento's apartment at a commercial business center. Based on interviews with the suspects, prosecutors believe that a 4th suspect, 43-year-old Taya Turner, waited in a stairwell with a gun. After arriving at the address around 6 o'clock in the evening, Ali and his friend, 22-year-old Kyle Foster, entered the building with a bag full of cash. Ali encountered Quento, Ashley, and Jackson, and something about the way they were acting concerned him, so he exited the building and returned to his car. He put the money in the vehicle and re-entered the building with his own gun. For the next half hour or so, the men apparently just hung out and talked. Around 6:30 p.m., Jackson and Ashley reportedly left the apartment to pick up food. Shortly after Ashley handed Ali this food, Turner emerged from beneath the stairwell where he was hiding and shot Ali. According to a sheriff's report, Ali's milkshake spilled everywhere and he stumbled outside while crying in pain. He collapsed and died in the parking lot, while the suspects fled the scene and went on the run. Quento went to Las Vegas, while Ashley and Jackson were found in Los Angeles. Police eventually picked up the trio at Mandalay Bay Casino in Las Vegas. Turner was apprehended in Virginia by U.S. Marshals. All 4 men are being held without bond at the Pinellas County Jail, with each facing a first-degree murder charge. Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri described video footage of Ali's death as sad, but also refused to consider the young man an innocent victim. In Gualtieri's words, "When you play with fire, you're gonna get burned." 7. The shooting of Troy Patterson. 27-year-old NYPD officer Troy Patterson was off duty when he was confronted by a trio of thieves while washing his car in Brooklyn's Bedford-Stuyvesant neighborhood one day in January 1990. 3 young men ambushed the cop and demanded money before one of the suspects pulled a gun and shot Patterson in the head, who survived, but spent the next 33 years in a catatonic state. This would have been a horrific act for any amount of money, but it's utterly shocking that the thieves pulled the trigger in a bid to obtain $20 to join a basketball league with. The shooting happened at a particularly violent time in New York City's history. It happened just days into the year, adding on to the 2,445 murders that took place the previous year. But the particularly brutal nature of the crime and the fact that a member of law enforcement was mercilessly gunned down in cold blood left the city in an especially shocked state. In 2016, Patterson was promoted to the rank of detective. It was a symbolic but highly meaningful promotion for the chronically injured cop, who spent decades unable to care for himself or communicate verbally. His mother and other relatives cared for him until they were no longer able to, at which point he was moved to an assisted care facility where his family visited him regularly. Although he couldn't talk, his loved ones said that they believed he could feel their presence. Patterson passed away at a rehabilitation center in New Jersey in 2023 after living in a vegetative-like state for 33 years. He was 60 years old. The alleged shooter, Tracy Clark, was just a teen when he made the fateful decision to pull the trigger. He was convicted of assault, attempted robbery, and a weapon-related charge. But he was acquitted of attempted murder and given a shockingly light sentence due to his young age. Had Clark been over 18 at the time of the crime, he could have faced life behind bars. Instead, he spent just a few months incarcerated before regaining his freedom. His two accomplices were also convicted of their roles in botched robbery and have served their time. Following Patterson's death, Clark, who's now 49 years old, publicly apologized for his actions while also insisting that he had paid his debt to society for the crime. His words fell on deaf ears, however, with many feeling as if Clark and his co-conspirators never truly faced justice. Clark has served time for other crimes. In 2003, he was convicted of possessing narcotics with intent to distribute in Orangeburg County, South Carolina. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and was released in 2017. In May 2023, the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office announced that they were considering the possibility of pressing additional charges against the three men now that Patterson had passed away. A spokesperson said that the process of reviewing the case may take several weeks, and the DA's decision on whether to levy additional charges against the trio has yet to be revealed. Speaking with the New York Post, Clark said that he doesn't have much to say about the situation. He described the ordeal as a 30-year nightmare and declined to comment on the possibility that he could face new charges. Clark did offer his condolences to Patterson's family and said that he will surrender willingly to law enforcement if he's held criminally liable for the fallen officer's death. The case is ongoing. 6. Near fatal Stamford shooting. A Stamford, Connecticut man was rushed to the hospital with life-threatening injuries in February 2023 after being shot in the abdomen during a botched robbery. It happened in the driveway of a local home during the pre-dawn hours. The victim was rushed to the emergency room and spent several days in intensive care with a perforated liver and internal bleeding. His injuries were serious and he was lucky to survive. A lengthy investigation ensued. Nearly 2 months later, police finally arrested the first of 3 suspects in the case, 37-year-old Jose Enrique Montanez of Bridgeport. In the process of identifying Montanez as a suspect, investigators also traced the vehicle they believe was used in the crime. They found Montanez near the crime scene and took him into custody with help from specially trained organized crime and narcotics officers. Montanez faces charges of assault, robbery, conspiracy to commit robbery, and criminal possession of a firearm. He already has numerous drug-related felony convictions under his belt and is being held on $900,000 bail while his current case works its way through the court system. Just days after arresting Montanez, authorities nabbed a second suspect, David Lewis of New Milford. He faces the same charges as his alleged co-conspirator and is being held on a $150,000 bond. The victim is fortunate to be alive, and the suspects are also lucky the victim survived. They could go to prison for a long time if convicted of the charges they face, but they would potentially be facing a much longer sentence if they were facing homicide charges. A third suspect remains at large. 5. Casino Holdup crew. 32-year-old Anthony Rivas was working as a security guard at a hookah lounge in California's Hollywood Hills during the early morning hours of May 31, 2023, when a pair of masked robbers stormed the premises with assault rifles. Rivas drew his handgun in an attempt to defend himself and was mercilessly gunned down in a hailstorm of gunfire. He died at the scene, leaving behind a young son. According to LAPD, the business was being used as an underground casino. After hearing the gunshots, around 30 customers and workers fled the scene in a panic. The robbers left without collecting any of the money they came for, and the case was handed over to the LAPD's gang unit. A major break came when one of the officers assigned to the case recognized the thief's getaway car in security footage from the botched holdup. By tracing what they knew about the car, investigators identified 29-year-old Matthew S. Riley as their first suspect. Further investigation led them to a second suspect, 26-year-old Rudy J. Madrid. Both Riley and Madrid matched the eyewitness descriptions of the gunmen as tall and skinny. The men each face a murder charge in connection with the crime. Authorities also charged two additional suspects, 23-year-old Stephen H. Dunkel and 52-year-old Michael J. Blankenship, with conspiracy to commit robbery. According to investigators, the four men were operating as an organized casino hold-up crew that targeted illegal high-stakes games. They based this theory on the fact that Stephen Dunkel, who has no prior criminal history, previously worked in various gambling parlors as a card dealer. He's accused of being the robbery crew's inside man who provided leads on which games to rob. Detectives believe Michael Blankenship acted as a decoy by entering the parlor ahead of time to ensure that the door was not locked and to distract security guards. Rivas confronted Blankenship, at which point police believe Riley and Madrid barged in with their guns. The building where the deadly robbery occurred is owned by a surgeon who insisted to law enforcement that he believed the storefront was being legitimately rented out as a hooker lounge. But the person who was running the illegal gambling lounge reportedly admitted to investigators that he paid $10,000 per month to the surgeon to host games twice a week. Inside the parlor, police found two large poker tables, a fully staffed kitchen and bar, and multiple prostitutes. The hosts also offered valet parking in a nearby gated lot. But the underground activity came to an abrupt halt when it ended in murder, and the outcome of the situation for the suspects is yet to be seen. 4. Randy Jones. While off duty one evening in early 2023, a 26-year-old NYPD officer named Adid Fayaz went with his brother-in-law to Brooklyn's East New York neighborhood to buy a Honda Pilot that was advertised for sale for $24,000 on Facebook. When Fayaz and his brother-in-law arrived at the designated address, the man they met with led them into an alleyway and jokingly asked if they were armed. He then put Fayaz in a headlock and demanded the money for the car. According to an NYPD spokesperson, Fayaz said he didn't have the money, at which point the thief pointed a gun at the officer's brother-in-law. It would later be revealed that Fayaz and his brother-in-law had left the cash for the Honda in their vehicle, which is why the thief never got his hands on it. Fayaz fought back against his attacker and managed to break free from the headlock, but was shot in the head. The perpetrator then fled the scene, firing several more shots as he ran away and then sped off in a BMW. In the meantime, Fayaz's brother-in-law grabbed the off-duty cop's gun from his holster and shot back at the suspect. One of the vehicles hit the getaway vehicle, but neither the suspect nor the brother-in-law were injured. EMTs rushed Fayaz to the hospital, where he clung to life for 3 days before succumbing to his injuries. 2 days after the crime, while Fayaz was still fighting for his life, authorities tracked down and arrested the suspected shooter, 38-year-old Randy Popper Jones, at a motel in Long Island. He was found hiding out in a room with a woman and 5 kids and had allegedly tried to conceal the bullet hole on his vehicle with tape. Jones was charged with murder and attempted robbery and is currently being held without bail at Rikers Island while the case proceeds in court. More than 100 police officers attended his arraignment in honor of Fayaz. During his most recent court appearance in May 2023, which lasted for just 3 minutes, Jones was formally indicted on the charges. So many cops attended in Fayaz's honor that the judge moved the proceeding to a bigger courtroom in order to accommodate everyone there. The seats were completely filled, and members of law enforcement lined the walls. In addition to being accused of killing a cop, Jones faces charges for a similar incident that happened just weeks earlier and ended without any bloodshed. According to police documents, Jones met with another man in mid-January regarding a Honda Odyssey he advertised on Facebook Marketplace. When the buyer arrived, he pulled a gun and robbed the victim of $18,000 cash. If convicted, Jones could face life in prison without parole, which is exactly what he deserves, according to Police Benevolent Association President Patrick Lynch, who described Jones as a ruthless and dangerous killer who preys not only on innocent New Yorkers, but on trained and armed police officers. 3. Oscar Gonzalez Alarenja. One afternoon in April 2023, a male suspect entered a Wells Fargo bank in Arlington, Virginia, right across the Potomac River from Washington, D.C., grabbed an employee and claimed to have a gun. He took 5 people hostage and demanded money as he walked behind the counter. Police cordoned off a several-block area and surrounded the bank as the suspect barricaded himself and his captives inside the bank. Specially trained emergency response team members got as close to the building as they could and issued instructions to the suspect. Luckily, he complied. Just an hour after the robbery began, the hostages exited the bank. Paramedics examined everyone on the scene and gave them all a clean bill of health. The hostages were followed by the suspect, identified by law enforcement as 30-year-old Oscar Gonzalez Alarenja of Raleigh, North Carolina, who was taken into custody without incident. After exiting the building empty-handed, he was charged with robbery and abduction. And as it turned out, he also may have been bluffing when he made it seem like he had a weapon, because no weapons were found at the scene. According to the most recent media updates on the case, the investigation is ongoing. 2. NYC nightclub robbery spree. Over a 15-month period starting in March of 2021, at least one organized group of criminals drugged and robbed 16 or more patrons at gay nightclubs in New York City's Hell's Kitchen district. At least 7 people were killed. 2 victims, 25-year-old Julio Ramirez and 33-year-old John Umberger, died from overdoses of fentanyl along with other drugs that were found in their systems. The perpetrators made off with their victims' cell phones, wallets, and other belongings, and they used the victims' debit and credit cards to take money from their accounts. Authorities initially believed the deaths were accidental until they discovered the stolen funds. It was at that point that they began investigating the cases as homicides. According to Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, members of the theft ring approached customers as they were leaving bars, engaged them in conversation, offered them drugs, and proceeded to rob the victims. Cell phone footage from inside an apartment allegedly showed 2 suspects with one of the victims who was unconscious on a bed, lying in the same position he was found dead in. Months dragged on without any arrests. Finally, in March 2023, a grand jury indicted 6 defendants in Ramirez and Umberger's deaths. All 6 suspects face robbery, identity theft, grand larceny, and conspiracy charges. The alleged ringleader, 35-year-old Jaquan Hamilton, and his accused co-conspirator, 34-year-old Robert DeMaio, were each charged with 2 counts of murder, while 29-year-old Jacob Barroso was hit with 1 murder count. Given the fact that the victims were targeted at gay nightclubs, it was only natural to wonder if the crimes were at least partially motivated by hate. But that wasn't the case, according to New York City Mayor Eric Adams, who said that the thieves were driven purely by greed and a reckless disregard for the safety and lives of their victims. It's unclear whether the 6 men who are currently facing charges are connected with any of the other nightclub overdose deaths. Investigators have also not yet speculated on whether they believe the deaths were intentional, although a second-degree murder charge is typically issued in cases of suspected intentional homicide in New York State. According to authorities, the investigation is ongoing. 1. Ronald Jackson Jr. 36-year-old James Williams was working the overnight shift at a Chevron gas station in Antioch, California in 2022 when he came face to face with 2 armed thieves. Police found him on the floor with a gunshot wound during the early morning hours while responding to a report of a shooting at the store. According to law enforcement, Williams told his co-worker, Annette Matamoros, that someone was trying to rob the store and to stay put. Annette later told ABC7 that she overheard gunshots while hiding in the bathroom. She ran out of the restroom and saw Williams falling to the ground. The traumatized worker told the news station that she knew it was bad when she saw her colleague on the floor in a pool of blood and with blood pouring out of his mouth. Authorities revealed that Williams chased after and shot at both suspects, striking 20-year-old Ronald Jackson Jr. in the leg. Jackson allegedly shot back, striking Williams in the chest and leg. The clerk died from his injuries. Investigators revealed that Jackson and another suspect made off with cigars and an undisclosed amount of cash. Annette Matamoros, who was working with Williams at the time of the disturbing encounter, told ABC7 that less than $150 is kept in the cash register at all times, so it's unlikely that the thieves got much money, and sadly, a man needlessly died in the process. Despite the fatal nature of the robbery, the district attorney's office declined to press murder charges against Jackson. He faces 1 count each of robbery, possession of stolen property, and a firearm enhancement, which means that the charge was upgraded to a more serious level because a gun was involved. Sadly, the other suspects in the case remain at large. Thanks for watching. Would you rather live in a place where crimes rarely happen, but are major when they do occur? Or in a place where petty crime is common, but violent incidents are practically unheard of? Let us know in the comments below and remember to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.